So look, it's wonderful to see such a strong turnout for the third and final event in the Financial Services Council, INFINZ, and Empower Women in Leadership series, tonight focused on male allyship. And we're hugely honoured to be able to host that the event tonight, and certainly this topic, which is is a really sort of strong personal one for me and for the Deloitte whānau. So I just wanted to make a few sort of, I guess, personal reflections just to kick things off before I pass on to Kirk. And for me, look, starting off, the key is really about taking personal ownership. I mean, yes, it's about how we can collectively we can make a difference, but that collective will only actually be effective if we take individual ownership of trying to make a difference. And I think it's also about consistency. It's consistency of message and consistency of action. In the modern parlance, this isn't really about a one-off script. It's about what you do every day. And even more importantly, it's about what you do when others aren't looking. In terms of our Deloitte journey, I thought I'd also just share a couple of other insights. So a couple of years, I've been in the CEO role for this is my sort of fifth year, and a couple of years before I took on the role, our median GPG was in the high 20%. We didn't have a gender pay equity problem, but we did have a gender pay gap that was pretty material. And I think it's really easy to try and put a context around that. You know, for example, we've got a big technology business, and there's a degree of occupational segregation in parts of that sort of industry. But it's not about rationalising the why. It's about what you do to address it. And with a focus on gender parity across all areas of our business and specific interventions in some of those areas, such as technology, you know, we now have women at more than 50% of pretty much all parts of our business. And our gender pay gap is now below 2%. So, you know, we've made some really material movements. But the area that we've still got work to do, in June 2019, we only had 16% of female partners. Now, currently, we've got that at around sort of 30%. But, you know, one of the mechanisms that we really looked at there was about implementing personal goals for all our partners and for a lot of our people about what they can do, you know, to really develop and support the talent of our emerging female leaders. What that really did is it facilitated, I think, greater recognition of the need for and the value of sponsoring talent in females, and then really to navigate some of the barriers that can be unique or shouldered by women to bring them through into more leadership roles. As well as sort of, I think, thinking about bringing women through to partner, we continue to think about how we can create, you know, more opportunities across a whole range of leadership positions, whether that be our board roles or whether that be, you know, key client service roles. What we've also done is implement our own Women in Leadership program and about to kick off on some work to further understand the barriers to partnership. Because again, it's one of those things where you can make great progress, but then you can plateau. And I think that you've got to then look at yourself in the mirror and go, what else do we need to do to reset and move forward? Now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Kirk, who is CEO of the Financial Services Council, up to the stage.
Thanks, Mike. Very generous, not touching my notes. Good on you. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome, everybody. Really great to be here. And again, thanks for hosting us, Mike. And just another hand for the work that you and the team at Deloitte have done from Prue. Thank you. But as you say, the work's not completed yet and continues. This is obviously the third event in the Empower and Elevate Women in Finance Leadership series, an important and the first collaboration between INFINZ and FSC, led by FSC's Empower Women. We have the co-chairs Tracey and Prue here, arising from the joint recognition of a need for inclusive leadership that addresses the issues for working women in leadership and those starting their career journey in our industry. It's a collaboration focused on supporting impactful change. The first two events were sold out. We've got a full room tonight. These panel discussions around case studies and real life examples with practicable, actionable takeaways. That was kind of one of the things that I think we're really hot on. What are we actually going to do that'll be different, that'll make a difference? The first two events focused on women beginning their leadership journey and how we address structural obstacles that Mike referred to in his opening comments that impact recruitment and the retention of women in our industry. This third event, Male Allyship, focuses on the business case for inclusive leadership, hearing from CEOs who have walked the talk in this space. In terms of the importance of inclusive leadership and the critical role men can play. Inclusive leadership obviously enables organisations to better anticipate and adapt to change, drive innovation, and achieve or even exceed financial performance goals, making it more relevant than ever. And a core element of inclusive leadership is male allyship. This panel is going to share their own successes and learnings in unlocking inclusive leadership capability, mastering the art of allyship, and enhancing leadership effectiveness for positive change and financial success within their organisation. Say that fast if you can. Now it is up to me to introduce our facilitator, a great facilitator. I've been facilitated by Katie Bhreatnach before. She's CEO of Global Women. She's an experienced business leader, passionate about empowerment and the advancement of wahine and Māori. She has a global perspective gleaned from experience studying and working overseas, coupled with a passion and drive for innovating for a strong, successful and sustainable Aotearoa for all of its people. Her executive career is marked by commercial breadth across diverse sectors, including financial services, FMCG, manufacturing, infrastructure, is there any William? An experienced director and chartered member of the Institute of Directors. Katie's directorships have also included Dunedin International Airport, Global Women, AMP, Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, College of Law, Chair of Trust, Serena Stadium, and the Chair of St Mary's College in Ponsonby. Without further ado, I'd like you to put your hands together for Katie.
Been asked to turn my microphone on, but I'm not sure I need it. Kanui te mihi atu kia koe Mike mo tō karakia. Hoki tō whakaruru hau i a tātou katoa. Thank you for opening us up at the karakia. And kanui te mihi atu kia koe Kirk for your very generous introduction also. I just wanted to start actually by saying it's always wonderful to hear amazing male leaders stand up and talk about the power of sponsoring. And so thank you for that, Mike. But the joy for me to look out when I just sit up here and see Bindi in your organisation here, who's currently on the Breakthrough Leaders Program at Global Women, and to see her here, hearing you talk about sponsorship and while you're sponsoring her is exactly what it's all about. So kia ora. So it's over to me to, I guess, first of all, set the scene a bit and welcome our speakers, because you want to hear from them, because it's all about male allyship, not about women. But I just want to start by saying that at the moment, we're living in a world with a global context where you're hearing, go woke, or, go broke, and constant snippets from the US, and unfortunately a few bubbling up here in New Zealand. So it's an interesting time for us all to be here. And it's just great to have so many people in the room to share in this context and look at, as Kirk said, what can we take away that's practical and take back, not only for ourselves, but to those who aren't here with us. So on that note, I'd like to first of all welcome, it's an honour and privilege really, to introduce you first to Mr. Matt Prichard. It's almost like walking you up like a catwalk. So maybe yourself, and I'll introduce you all, but it's a real honour for me to introduce you to.
It's not coming long to start the now.
Matt. Please don't, Matt. So, Matt is.
It's like this.
I know. I'm course correct, Katie. Matt is married to Leanne. He's the father of 5 children. I happen to know who age between 10 and 16, as well as a live-in niece, I believe. And as the oldest of 6 children, I can just imagine the chaos you have at home. He's had a 30-year career with KPMG, which is pretty impressive, and it spanned New Zealand, London, Luxembourg, Botswana, and it's been primarily, I understand, with banks, insurers, and fund managers. Yeah, that is, of course, the chair of KPMG as well. It's also my great honour to introduce you to Mr. David McLean. He is the chair of Kiwi Group Capital, former CEO of Westpac New Zealand, so similar background in law and banking, as well as being a respected leader in infrastructure. He's known for championing diversity and inclusion throughout his career, and we'll look forward to hearing what he's going to share with us shortly. Last but certainly not least is my good friend, Mr. Joe Consedine. He is no stranger to this conversation. He's the co-founder of Mobilise. He's the head of diversity, equity, inclusion at ANZ Bank, and used to be the director of Champions for Change at Global Women, his most esteemed role today. He is also a huge proponent of the topic we're here to talk about today, male allyship. So there could be no one better placed to help us with some takeaways than Jared. So, David, I guess, go woke, go broke, the narrative in the US. I want to start off with you, I guess, by saying, what can you tell us about something you've done in your career that you can share with us that went well, went badly, that we can reflect on?
Well, thank you, Katie. And first of all, I'd say kia ora koutou. It does feel a bit awkward to be here talking about male allyship to an audience with a lot of women, because I'm sure you know far more than us blokes about what we should be doing differently. So take that with a grain of salt. It is a kind of personal journey, I would say, as I think Mike said. It is a personal thing that people have to get there. We get asked a lot of times about the business case. I think Kirk said the business case for it. But to me, you either get it or you don't, and if you don't get it, it's a different conversation. So for me, it's much more about what have I done or what have we tried over time that worked and what didn't. I think one of the starting point for me was sort of thinking, is the workplace of today, the modern sort of way of working, is it a gender neutral framework and it's up to each individual to try and make the best of it? Or if you really look at history, is it a way of working that was designed by men for men over the last few hundred years, often in the military, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and it might have been, suited men, but not necessarily others. So if you start with that sort of critical or skeptical way of thinking about it, then you shouldn't assume anything is optimal. So for me, things that we kind of tried over time, the first thing I'd say is encourage that healthy skepticism. This is the way we've always done it, but is that right or is that best? Some of the things, be curious, ask particularly the people who are in the situation, the women in the organisation, what's working, what's not working for them. At one base level of I think is very important that men often overlook is the workplace safe and does it feel safe for women? I think most men in white-collar jobs in New Zealand would not ever think that their workplace wasn't safe, probably, but that's not true, and it's quite surprising when you talk to women in the workforce. They don't always feel safe in the workforce. Now that to me is just like absolute, sort of base level of Maslow's hierarchy or whatever. So, that's something I think men need to think of, and that's about role modeling, calling out poor behaviours, even from your mates. I think things like, being skeptical about things like internal policies. Are they fit for purpose? Were they written for a male-dominated workforce? Parental leave and this sort of thing are obvious examples, but being critically skeptical about them and revisiting them. I think just a couple of other things I had in mind were, one of the things as a male leader is wanting to help, but not falling into the trap of knowing how to do it. Don't worry, us men are here to fix it, sort of ladies, sort of thing. Don't fall into that trap. So a lot of it is just small things, amplifying women's voices who often tend to get shut down in meetings and things. Encouraging women's networks within the organisations or externally. I think, but most powerfully I found was asking women in the organisation what we needed to do differently. But asking them is not enough. You've got to create a safe way for them to tell you what the answer is without them feeling that it's somehow going to be career limiting. And that's often quite challenging. So finding a way for, whether it's a group or whatever, that can give you feedback and then actually actioning it, because there's no better way to stop feedback coming through than not doing anything about it. So my view is the women in the organisation will often know what needs to be done. And a couple of other things was just a basic thing is use data to drive action, particularly on pay. It's all of the data, and often we look at that data and we find the good points and pat ourselves on the back. Oh, we've improved on this metric. If you turn it up the other way and say, what is the data showing us where the gaps are? And how do we do that? Again, being critical about it and admitting to yourself and to the rest of the team that you've got issues and that you're trying to fix them. I think is people welcome that honesty. I think another thing for males who want to be allies is talk to others who are going through the same thing. Join organisations like Champions for Change. Share the experiences with others. The last thing I would say was sponsor. As Mike said, very critical. People talk about coaching, they talk about mentoring, but equally important for me is sponsoring, having particularly, say, a male leadership, for example, who will be putting forward the names of high potential women in the organisation for opportunities. It's that pushing in the organisation.
It's my bugbear. Every exec I sat around, every male that I said I was very good at going, Joe would be great at that job. We'll get Joe. Joe would do a really solid job of that. I think women are great at mentoring, but whenever anyone asks me, and you all know this, going to be that before Tanya and Tracey, but sponsor a woman, give her an opportunity that will allow her to grow or shine, that will allow her to grow in her career. It's the best thing you can ever do. Awesome. So I suppose turning to you, Mr. Matt Prichard, I'm really interested. I had the great privilege of working with business leaders, and I think Antonia and Joe's boss and Roger, the CEO of Port of Auckland, the co-chairs of Champions of Change for the moment, came out recently, really clearly saying that they don't see any of this as a compliance ticking exercise. It's not it's not to look good or to signal virtue to anyone. It really is because it's good for business. I'm interested in your experience, your 30-year career. Has it been good for business, or what have you learned along the way that you can share with us?
Kia ora koutou. I think there's a head and a heart answer when you get into why would you bother making a difference in this stuff, and I give a different answer depending on who's asking. If I'm in a safe place, I'll give the hard answer and say, injustice pisses me off, and people not having a fair shot when they've got equal talent really gets under my skin, and that's the reason to do it. That's the reason that frankly drives me in some things that I've done. But if you need, you can give a head answer, and boy am I over having to hear recited evidence about why diversity is good for businesses. There's not a single study out there that says a homogenous group of straight, white, cisgender males, who went to the same school will make a better decision. So why are we debating whether ID&E programs are sensible for businesses to run? In a business like mine, which is all about talent, why would we even have to have a discussion about would you like to adjust your workplace to attract the whole talent pool, the best from the whole talent pool? It's a nonsense to have to discuss those things. So I'm kind of over those discussions, and it's like talking to climate deniers about climate change. You're just wasting your breath. Move on to people who get it and are trying to do something about it. And are up there for concrete change. But I've lived through change in my industry and in this financial services industry that I've always been a part of in an advisor role. And I didn't start in a firm that was woke and awake and attractive. I was a sporty white male 21-year-old graduate recruit to KPMG. I fitted right in from day one. I belonged as soon as I walked through the door, and I realise now that not everybody did, and that it wasn't the same for everybody who, even though we were recruiting pretty broadly in those days in the mid-90s, they didn't have the same experience that I did. They didn't have the same support that I did. They had to fight for things that I didn't have to fight for. And I realised those things as I matured, and I grew up and had more responsibility. I also made one very good decision in life. I married my secondary school sweetheart, who became a med student and then an emergency medicine doctor. So there was never any question in my marriage or home life that both jobs were important, and actually hers was much more important than mine on any given day. And I don't say that lightly. I think that was a gift that I got. There was never any question when we were moving around the world that sometimes I was following her, and it was stuff that she was doing, whether it was education or job opportunities, and that we were having adventures together in a very even way before we had kids. And then when we had kids, it just seemed very natural that was a very even thing too. It's not exactly balanced. I work more hours than she does, and she carries more of the load than I do, but it's much more balanced than I see a lot of. And there is no doubt if she's working a shift today that I had to do the drop off in the morning, and I had to pick the kids up from school. There's no other way in our family life of getting that done. So that opened my eyes, and then I'd been the first weirdo male in my firm to be part-time and go down to part-time hours to spread the load while she was studying, working, passing exams, and doing crazy hours as a junior doctor. But then I went full-time as a dad, and we moved to a small island in the third world when Vanuatu got smashed by a cyclone, and I had that experience of 9 months, newborn baby, 3 other kids. Leanne brought home an extra child at lunchtime one day and said, "You're looking after her as well."
I love her.
Yeah. And it was both the most amazing time of my life and the hardest time of my life, and that was brilliant. But then through a whole combination of factors, quite suddenly we came back, and I went back to work. And in the workplace that I was so secure and so privileged and so senior, and I should have been so comfortable, I couldn't function. I couldn't get through a day easily. I couldn't get my head around what had been so familiar. I had to leave the building to get my head straight, go for a walk, and then I could try and get back into stuff that I knew so well. And I should have been, I had so many advantages that not every mother taking parental leave has coming back into the workplace. And it took me months, and the only people who understood what I was going through were all the other mothers who were coming back to work. And for a while, I became a celebrity by sitting on stages like this and talking about how crap it was. And then a whole lot of women said, "Can you stop, please? Because you're not that special." And you're getting all the attention because of that. In terms of practical things, because you asked for practical advice, and I'm supposed to shut up in a minute.
So just practical advice that people are sitting in the audience here thinking, what could I actually take away, take back with me and do differently, or tell other people, share with them that they could do differently too?
Yeah, so most things in my workplace, and Mike talked about a similar development over his career at Deloitte, bias has been eliminated. If you behave badly as a male in that kind of 1980s way, you get stomped on and you're out. That sort of stuff has been gradually eliminated. A bias in pay and promotions should not persist in any of our organisations in this audience today, but parenting is still gendered, and it's still generally rubbish in terms of how your organisation handles the fact that you're interrupting your career, you're having that intense experience, and then you're having to come back into the workplace and start again. That's what we identified by looking at the numbers. If you properly analyse where you're losing talent, a lot of it is around that parenting, where frankly you've invested as an organisation 10 or 15 years of development into creating a really strong person, and then you crap all over them just because they make the silly choice of becoming a parent, and it's awful for them. Having gone through that a bit myself, we looked hard at our policy 3 years ago, and KPMG's policy, and it's not that rare anymore, is that primary and secondary caregivers have 18 weeks paid leave, lots of return to work support. But by saying primary and secondary, we know primary caregiver is code for female. In 90-something% of circumstances, couples will choose that it is the woman who's just had the baby and might be feeding the baby who will take. So you have to take that bias out of the policy. It's therefore costing us twice as much as it used to run parental leave in a gender-balanced firm. But the latest stats are 43% of people taking parental leave long-term, stay at home, look after the child in our firm are male. And that is changing everything, because until males understand exactly what it's like, because they've done it as well, to take a big chunk of time out to have that intense experience of full-on parenting, return to work and try and pick up as if you've never left, then they won't be good colleagues, they won't be good peers, they won't be a good boss. We have to take gender out of these things. Everything else that we tried hadn't worked. As necessary and as effective as they are at fixing some things, sponsorship, mentoring, celebration days, they don't move the dial as much as men having the same experience through their careers as women have at that critical stage. So I'd encourage you to think about that policy. Other organisations have taken up that policy. It's the one thing that has really shifted the dial on that phase of people's careers inside my organisation.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So I suppose it would be easy listening to David and Matt to think, well, there's no problem, but why is anyone to hear that? If it's good for business, no debate, case closed, why do we still need panels like this? And so I guess I'm really interested in your views, Joe, and you step into a lot of different kinds of organisations that perhaps don't have as much sophistication, or they're not as far along the journey as David and Matt's organisations, to share with us sort of what about the rest, or why we're still here, or what else is going on in this equation.
Yeah, kia ora, Katie. Kia ora tātou katoa, e piana ka hautua ki nei rā. Have I got it? Thank you, David. That's why you have very experienced chief executives, our guest, to assist these sorts of things. It's great to be with you, everyone. My observation working in diversity and inclusion, particularly as a white male over the last few years, is that the diversity and inclusion movement has unintentionally created gendered division within our workplaces. That men feel isolated from this movement. I have this funny life where I play a lot of sport outside of work, and so I'm in a lot of male-only environments, in changing rooms and clubhouses and pubs and cafes, meeting new men, and it's always interesting conversation when you get to that awkward part of the conversation, meeting new men, where you kind of introduce yourself and say, what do you do for a job? And they say, I'm a partner at PwC or KPMG or something like that. And I say, I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they say, oh, bloody hell. So you're in charge of those targets for women. And, if I'm a 50-year-old white male, I'm stuffed in this job market. It's gone too far. It's woke. There needs to be a correction. And so this is the conversation we're having, that men are regularly having outside of the workplace. And then inside the workplace, we're saying, oh, yep, I agree. Because our personal brand within an organization is really important to us. We don't want to be considered that anti-diversity and inclusion person. We want to get that next promotion. We want to fit into the aspiration of the executive team and the board, who are setting out strategies around diversity and inclusion. But there hasn't been a space for men to ask, kind of in a safe space, to ask some of those questions that we're actually holding on to. I want to talk about merit. I want to talk about targets. I want to talk about the difference between equality and equity. Why do we need interventions around recruitment? Why do we need different policies and strategies to assist our underrepresented groups to have an equal opportunity to thrive in our workplaces? And so that's been missing, which has created this division. And so, part of the work that I do now is to get male leaders together within organizations to have that kōrero, to create a space where you can actually have this kind of cathartic process to get a few things off your chest, to actually examine the business case around it and examine critically, what is my role in this? What's my why? What impact might I have? And we're having some real success in terms of, first of all, getting past those questions and then stepping into, how might I tool up? Like, what are the traits of an inclusive leader? What are the action-oriented things that I can do to sponsor women, to create space for others, to create voice for others within organizations, and move from this scarcity mindset that power is a zero-sum game, that if I am involved in diversity and inclusion, I'm being asked to give up my seat, to a mindset of growth, of
that power isn't a zero-sum game, that when I create space for others, I'm creating power for everyone, including myself. That's been my lived experience, being allied within organizations. Even, and to Matt's point around parental leave, I had 18 months off with parental leave as a father when my daughter was about 18 months old. I had a completely different experience when I came back to the workplace. I came straight back into a senior leadership position within an organization, and I was lauded around the organization as a progressive male. And that actually helped my career rather than hindered it. So instead of having the motherhood penalty, I kind of had the fatherhood bonus, if you like. And so, we need to really lean into and start to be honest and have some authentic conversations around the bias that exists within our organizations and our systems, and actually, what is the role of men? Because I'm so passionate about that we need to stop asking the very underrepresented groups that are facing the barriers in the system that we're working in to solve that problem. Gender equity is not the problem of women to solve. It's, rainbow inclusion is not the problem of the rainbow community to solve. It's everyone's. And when we think about the representation of leadership that we have across our economy, it's dominated by people that look like us, that have the power to change strategy, to set communication narrative, to change policy. So it makes so much sense to me that we mobilize the majority groups who are holding power within the system to be part of the solution rather than feeling like we're part of the problem or being blamed for the problem, which is coming up a lot in the work that we're doing. So I went on a bit of a rant there.
I just loved the body language from David and Matt when you were first talking, of like not agreeing with you, feeling. So there's a range of views out there, and that's a really useful place to actually open up, I think, the conversation. And the goal of today is very much that everybody can take things away, take back that are practical. And so, on that note, would really love to hear questions from people. And if you don't ask them, I know so many people in the audience, I can just pick on you, so I'm just warning you. But I'd really love to hear, Kilda. We have mics too, actually, by the way, they're just coming through. You have to compete with mine and thanks, Joe.
Kia ora. Jim McLean, Executive Director of INFINZ. Joe, you've been across a number of different organisations, and very interested in your views about what practically works, what has worked, what doesn't work. What will shift the dial?
In terms of gender equity more broadly, or male allyship, engaging allyship. Yeah. So I think we need to intentionally invite men into the conversation, for one. So a part of it is that men, around International Women's Day, for example, I'll get smashed on LinkedIn messages from men.
International Men's Day.
Well, yeah, that, definitely. Yeah.
Big day.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But the questions are, hey, Josh, is it the right thing for me to go to that breakfast that we're having at work, or will I be taking up the space of a woman, or will I be considered to be mansplaining when I'm there? So there's this well-intentioned but fear-based kind of attitude amongst men around stepping forward. I think of men inside an organisation as like on a bell curve for allyship. We have 10% on one side who will never participate in this and have quite fixed views on that. I'm not particularly interested in working with that cohort or banging my head against a brick wall. Then you have amazing 10% on the other side who are actively involved in employee-led networks within organisations, who are actively involved in inclusion. The majority, though, are in the middle of that bell curve, who are well-intentioned men, but have some questions or just need a bit of support and a bit of education to step into that space around being an inclusive leader. So I think the answer is to intentionally create environments for men and support them and help them to be an ally, to be an inclusive leader. That's the work that I'm really passionate about doing. So I'm happy to plug our program, which is exactly doing that, but it's probably not about spruiking that tonight.
What about you, David and Matt, just to kind of, I guess, it seemed the question out, like we've got a really large number of men in the room here, and they're here because they're interested in the topic, but what about the men who aren't? Like, what do we do about that? Or what would you suggest we take back to them or share with them, or acknowledging Joe's point that there's a certain portion of people he's not interested in, but I suppose from my perspective, trying to challenge that to go, the more people who we can try and help on this journey, the better for everyone.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm very much with Joe on this, that I really don't have the energy, or Matt said the same thing too. I really don't have the energy to take on these dinosaurs head on. My view is it is a relatively small percentage, as Joe said, on the bell curve who really sort of anti it. I think most of the men fall more into the camp of sort of being bewildered by the whole thing and not sure and not comfortable. I think I'm interpreting Joe as saying, a lot of men don't feel comfortable, not sure what to do, don't want to be do anything that's sort of awkward or career limiting. So I think the thing for that is practical tips helping, and I think the thing for me was when you're CEO, you just tell people to do it and they sort of hate to do it. So it's kind of easier, but getting people to want to do things is real leadership. And to me, I think it's a lot of it is the sort of support networks within. Getting them to get together and buy into the thing and solve problems for themselves.
I think that's right. I think Joe does amazing work to open up those conversations, those awkward conversations. And once you've had an awkward conversation, you can move on with real practical stuff. I've got one other experience, and I followed. David was a trailblazing chair of Champions for Change. He was famous for attending every party in town, event like this, and being on a stage and saying, as he did tonight, that workplaces were designed by men for men, and we've got to fix it. And it was radical, and he broke a lot of barriers. I followed him about 3 cheers later or 4 cheers later as chair of Champions for Change. They were still saying the same thing, and I had to disagree, and only on a subtlety. I think that workplaces were designed badly, and that if you have a chance with a male to say that you are stereotyped, that you are going to have a narrow life, you are going to stay at work long hours, push your way up the corporate career, you're never really expected to even think about wanting to be a full-time parent for part of your adult life. Isn't that a bit rubbish too? It's gender stereotyping that's rubbish. I think both stereotypes are rubbish. We need to get rid of the stereotypes and open up everybody's ability to live a much more balanced, much more healthy life through those stages. So some men you can open up with that argument, not the 10%ers.
Thank you. Question on probably for you, David, and that is, you've described these people, and Matt made some comments about them that you can't be bothered with because they're just dinosaurs. Is there a generational aspect to the people who had the beliefs that there's some difference and it's acceptable between men and women?
I think probably there is, there's sort of, when I say the older generation, I mean my generation. I think, certainly, if you think about it, the way we were brought up, in some ways it was sort of understandable. But I think older ones, do find it more difficult to change. But I would still say, across any slice of the demographic, there will be people who just don't get it and never going to get it. But I agree with Joe that it's not a big percentage. My view is you're much better to work on the middle, who might shift, than be battering your head against the ones who are never going to change. Or, as Joe said, I got to turn up to work and say, yeah, sure, I buy into that, but don't really. So find the ones who are confused in the middle, might be open to persuasion and want to do something but don't know how. I think that's much more fruitful.
I have to say, add something to that. Not that I was asked, but I can't help myself. And that is that through my career, I have had the most amazing fortune to have been sponsored by a number of amazing men who have seen talent in me and have given me opportunities when others didn't. And so, if I was to ask what could men do when they walk outside this room, sponsor a woman, give her a great opportunity, make her believe in herself even if she doesn't quite see it herself, because that's what will really also make a difference, right? It's certainly what I was the beneficiary of, and that includes men who would be in that generation that we're talking about now. I wouldn't have had the opportunities I had but for them. So, the ability to help people grow and shine and develop is what is a tangible action every man in this room can take.
Exactly right, and completely agree with that. I had just a slightly tongue-in-cheek comment to make about whether workplaces are designed for men by men, and most women I know find the air conditioning in offices way too cold.
I was reflecting when I was at Eden Park watching Samoa in Scotland on the extremely large queue for the women's toilets and thinking, why are they the same size? Who designed that?
Oh, just don't even go there. And I get the fatherhood bonus compared to the motherhood penalty, Joe, that you referred to. We've seen it in my own organisation where the men taking full-time parental leave, for goodness me, 4 months, got such a, pat on the back. Whereas the women, it's like, hell, and no big deal. The baby's come out of you, so you must be programmed to do it, right? Anyway, I'll give the mic back to the man. He's hovering.
I just wanted to add, I don't think we should trivialise the dangerous backlash that is out there. We've talked about it being a minority view and we can't be bothered with it, etc. But the leader of the free world has those views and he's passing laws. Some of our politicians are finding it popular and therefore they'll do it because that's how they're wired, to express anti-ID&E views and push those down into government departments. We giggle about it and say we can't be bothered, but actually it's quite dangerous and it's real and it's happening. So you have to stay firm.
I'm making the same as just on Matt's point as well. I was just saying here, and also when we talk about the younger generations coming through, I mean, how many people in this audience have watched Adolescence? Yes, that's a very dramatic and extreme version of events, but those things are happening. And we had a member of the board who attended South by Southwest this year, and there was a big conversation about the isolation of young men and young men being radicalized by the Manosphere and by the Andrew Tates of the world. And that's the thing that we need to be cognizant of. We can't just assume that the younger generations who are coming through are going to be different.
Thumbs up if you me book she's book. Kia ora. Oh, Steve.
I sort of can't resist one comment about the incredible burden of turning up at Women's Day or something like that, because that just drives me mad. Like, that is the situation that so many of our female colleagues face in the workplace. That you might be so precious that you find that an uncomfortable situation. Well, maybe the conversation is just that's how so many people feel when they walk into a meeting room, or they get talked over, or someone has to stand up for that situation and say, actually, I think Makata might have said that 5 comments ago. So I know if they've been actually played it back again. So, I get in one sense, I get the kind of uncomfortableness. In another sense, I just don't get it at all, which is if you don't normalise that situation to say, hey, this is what happens in our workplace, or what can we do differently to make that much safer. And, I recognise your situation, but maybe with a little bit more context. That's what people are facing every single day. So, that feeling, much like Matt was and others were alluding to, that feeling you've got now, just channel that and make sure that when you're in the next meeting, you're not the one propagating it. Well, isn't that the part of the answer, I think?
I love that. And one of the things that we do within the work we do is ask male leaders to go back into a meeting, might be a regular meeting that they have, and take their notebook, like they would take their notes and the action points within that meeting normally, but don't take the notes on that meeting, and write down what are the power dynamics that are happening within that meeting room table. So who are the loud voices? Who are dominating the discussion, the decision making? Who's being spoken over? Who you might have an idea taken credit for by someone else that has raised it early in a meeting? All these things. And it's really interesting from a male leadership perspective, when we reflect back on that and they come back into the reflection part of the workshop, they'll say, oh my God, women were constantly being spoken over in the meeting. I'm like, yeah, you have that meeting every week, right? And so it's actually raising our antennae as male leaders often to the power dynamics that are happening, and understanding that not everyone is having the same lived experience as us, because we're not facing the same discrimination or bias and barriers that other people are having. But we've found it quite hard to do that so far, and so it needs to be intentionally done to understand it. And then you can ask yourself, okay, well, how might I change? How might I adapt the way that we're leading these meetings now that I have that awareness and understanding?
It's always like flipping the script, right? I had the great benefit in COVID, when most of us were having a horrible time with coming back to work, and someone on my team had the best time ever because they had been able to live their life as they wanted to. So they came back to work and decided they were going to transition in the workplace from being a man to a woman. And the questions I got from people in the business, like, how will that work when they're having sex with their partner? And I was like, well, how does that work for you? You're like, oh, how can you be asking me that? But, turning the mirror around makes people reflect on how is that, to your point, like, how does that work for you? That's exactly how it works for other people, to put them in that position to be able to kind of see. Fantastic learning.
Small practical tip off what Joe was talking about, and men all will and try this in your meetings. I've developed a habit recently of calling out men in a humorous way, use humour. And so, did you just mansplain what Katie said 5 minutes ago? And it's lighthearted. You can do it. A woman can do it to a man can do it to another man. But it raises the awareness that is happening, and you just did it. And people will move on, but they'll stop doing it if it gets awkward that they've been called out 3 meetings in a row for doing it.
Thanks, somebody.
Hi. Although I think it's hugely commendable, I think, the parental leave issues that we're talking about is, minimum viable proposition. Similarly with female targets and gender pay gaps, it's, dare I say it, I'm going to make quite abrasive here. That's a word that you often hear as a woman. They're very easy tick boxes. Because they're obvious and they're one thing that you can put a lot of money behind, or, you just recruit a few more women. Actually, when I've talked about it with, friends and colleagues, actually some of these things run a lot deeper and they're a lot more difficult to address. And Joe picked up on just one of them. Everybody here would probably experience that, being talked over in a meeting, or your point being repeated several times later by a man and being applauded. And there's so many other examples. The way that women react to feedback is very different. The way that often, traditional male behaviors are seen as beneficial ones compared to traditionally feminine behaviors. And so often, to feel like you've got that, to be a successful woman, you need to emulate those masculine behaviors, and often that's more authentic, and therefore you come across as abrasive, which no man has ever been in his head been described as. I guess where I'm getting to is that actually quite a lot of this, and Matt, you're exactly right, which is how do we get to the point where actually when we feel it, and we feel it every day, that must be my problem. That must be, I must not be good enough. That's the way that we internalize these things a lot more than men do, and we do a lot more of that low confidence soul searching than men do. I'd love to be able to go, I feel right now, without, feeling like, I don't think that the job beyond the like, but to make that safe space to be able to go, oh, you've made me feel really crap. Now I feel it's my problem. We need to make that space to be able to do that, because it's very difficult to pull out those not microaggressions, but the things that really, really deeply impact us, that make us go, I'm not good enough to do this. So I'm not good enough to continue in this role, which goes beyond, quotas and leave. How do we make that? How do we make that space? And for the people who aren't sitting here, how do we get that message over?
But I can start with the plug, and that is that, we celebrate 15 years of Champions for Change this year with a fantastic gala dinner, if everyone would take it. And, Champions for Change leaders like Mike, like David, like Matt, they have been working and are continuing to work and show up because they're not easy problems to solve. If they were, we would have solved them 15 years ago because there's no shortage of commitment from male leaders, or a lot of leaders, but including those male leaders that are here today, right, and are here in front of you. But what we're doing as a group is constantly looking for ways to try and improve. And I agree with you that measuring gender pay gaps is not the solution, but it's a darn good start because you turn your mind to what you measure, and people are making tangible progress and have made tangible progress. Deloitte's an example, so is KPMG. Because they're measuring it and because they're looking at data and looking at where problems lie and trying to find solutions, but it's certainly not the only solution. And that's why, we continue to do work on minimum levels around paid parental leave. We have Dr. Amanda Sterling in the audience who's just published some research in the last couple of weeks trying to look at how can we help women as they, oversimplify your research, by the way, but, in their return to work, what can we do? What works? What doesn't work? What's the research telling us? So it's, being curious and constantly trying to search for solutions and ways to do things as part of the, but I'm sure the others have more to say as well. David does anyway.
I agree with you, and in some ways, sort of tackling the really fundamental things are quite difficult. And I think when you sort of say, things like the gender pay gap, it feels like a bit of a tick the box exercise, and it can do. But in my experience, if you use it properly, it's just trying to find metrics that show you where there's a problem. And then the answer is not to just improve the metric, but the answer is to try to say, what is the data telling us at the next level down or the next level down? So forcing you to ask the questions, why? Why is this created like this? No. It's because of the sort of more fundamental issues. So it's really a pathway to try to get to the more fundamental things. Because if you just start at those, it's like changing the company's culture or something. It's very difficult to get your hands on. And sometimes you just have to use some blunt instruments and some metrics or something to show you the way.
And sometimes you don't know what the solution is. I've sat around executive tables where I've had colleagues that have had very big Pacifica pay gaps, and they sort of said, well, I've sort of asked, but no one's really interested in leadership among the Pacific people in my team. And it's given us opportunity to go, have you considered maybe the way you've asked might not, be culturally how people put themselves forward for leadership. And if you actually are honest, the person who was saying that wasn't saying it through any bad intention, just a total lack of understanding about how leadership works in Pacifica cultures. And in learning and understanding that, they were able to unlock the opportunity to have conversations differently and actually make a real impact. And so there is that, you look at what you measure, it forces conversations, it helps you to learn more and understand, right?
Yeah, just to build on that, I want to acknowledge what you said. I'm a big believer in that diversity and inclusion should actually be inclusion and diversity rather than diversity and inclusion. That the diverse nature of your workforce will be as an outcome of the culture that you create, the psychological safety, the lived experience of your people. The panacea should be women saying, have you heard what it's like to work at Deloitte? Because I'm not spoken over in meetings. I have, I'm really supported here. My perspective is sought out and valued in decision making. I have a great line manager. I've got a pathway here. All that. Same for other underrepresented groups. Māori will make choices around how much Te Reo Māori is being used, how much tikanga practices are being used inside organisations, what other Māori leaders can I see within the organisation, and then they'll flock to that. You'll be a magnet for diverse talent into that organisation when you can do that, rather than just having a look at your workforce composition on a spreadsheet and go, how might we fix those gaps so that we can look better on our annual report or our Champions for Change reporting.
Pathai Mai.
Sure. I'm just wondering if you've ever been in a situation where you've seen an organisation overcorrect and in effect create ingenuine changes or less genuine changes. And what are the pitfalls to that, and what should we be aware of?
I haven't seen that, but I have seen organisations who have sort of kind of pretended that they've got there, or, sort of paid lip service to things, and everyone's sort of standing around saluting the flag or something, but showing that they believes it. I've seen that. The only thing I'd say with that is eventually you do get found out. I mean, eventually, if it's not authentic, if it's not real, people in the organisation know, and you'll suffer for it in the culture. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's, there's quite a well-established group, so you see it in the Australian businesses, for example, people faking it and organisations pretending it was fine. But I haven't seen anyone overdo it. I've certainly seen that.
Any last questions, Bernie?
Just to your point on the workplace sort of being designed for men, if we're looking at a 40-hour working week and children, it's really only feasible for one person, traditionally to do that. So I was really interested, you mentioned you went part-time. I hear of almost no senior roles that are part-time. Like, do you think that actually might change? So if you want to, the school's finished at 3 and your kids have got sports to go to. So if you actually want to parent and have a career, is that something that you don't have to sort of decide one or the other? Because obviously parental leave initially, fantastic, but those kids grow up. Like, what do you do next?
Yeah. If men are doing as much of that as women are doing, then all roles will tolerate that kind of flexibility that's necessary to be a parent. That's my theory.
I'm also talking part-time, like 20 hours a week type of thing. So you're not sort of, go pick up the kids at school and then whack them in front of the TV while they finish, the rest of the day.
Yep.
So, it's not just flexi, but actually different hours, job sharing, those types of things. Is that something that you're seeing at senior levels or might see?
More and more commonly, and I can only talk about my own experience, but I was a partner when I went part-time. I was thought to be completely bonkers. It was hard to make work, but it has become so much more normal now for that to work. And if you simply apply a logical brain to it, a head argument to it, if you won't adjust the job to fit that person, and doesn't matter what gender they are or what's demanding that they have that flexibility, then you lose the person. And how dumb is that? You think it's expensive to let people have leave or go part-time. How expensive the hidden cost of throwing away talent because their life now doesn't fit our one-way, same-way every time view of how our job has to work is just bonkers. It doesn't make any sense logically, and it certainly doesn't feel right in any heart argument.
But when you say we're a partner, normally partners work 50, 60 hours. You work part-time, is at 24 to 30 hours. 44. No, okay, sorry. We're getting that times 6.
No, it's a myth. It's a myth. It's a self-generated myth that you have to only one way to do that job, because when you stay in a partnership in a professional services firm, you are surrounded by much more so than any corporate role, other talented people who can do your work. Like if I was the CFO briefly when David was at Westpac. At Westpac, I had to be in my role. When I went back to being at KPMG and I was an external audit partner, there were 30 other external audit partners. It was only me stopping myself from saying, I'll take a lower client load, I'll be part-time, I'm going to have this different balance in my life. Professional services should be leading the way. They're not in all aspects, but they should be because of that large talent pool doing similar jobs.
Could I just say, I know I'm getting the message, George, but can I just say, just to answer your question, I'm a little bit more pessimistic than Matt. I don't think you'll see real change until the men, as Matt said earlier, are going through the same experience and then finding, I want to only work part-time because I want to spend time with children. The only way that'll happen is you have a real change in society. Yeah, and you look at countries in Scandinavia where they're kind of forcing parental leave to be taken equally by both parents, you're going to have to do things like that. I mean, New Zealand, the parental leave law still refers to the primary caregiver, so by default it's kind of pushed back to the woman. So I think we need a real societal change and say we've got to keep pushing for that.
Look, I just wanted to finish by saying it's really fantastic to see so many men in the room today. So I just want to acknowledge each and every one of you for being here and being part of this conversation, because you're 50% of the population and we need you. 49, sorry. 49, you're only 49% of the population, but we still need you. And look, I just wanted to invite each of our panelists to give you a challenge to take away very quickly that you can take back and perhaps share with another man who didn't make it here today. Perhaps he's at home looking after the children. Let's start with you, Joe.
Yeah. The 3 questions that I think are fundamental to leadership and inclusive leadership and allyship, ko waio, who am I? What is the power that I bring into the workplace? What's my story? Which allows you, when you do ask that question, to ask the next question, ko wai koe. How are other people that are different to me having a different lived experience? And then this third question, ko wai tātou, who are we all together? How are we going to create environments where all of these differences can be seen as a strength for business outcomes, for innovation, all of that? So it starts with ourselves, asking ourselves that question, and then it opens our minds and our hearts to other people to understand their lived experiences. So those are the 3 questions I'd like to leave you with.
Mine's not as deep as that, sorry. I would just say, I would say go back and try something no matter how small. Try something like sponsoring some woman in your organization, as well as the coaching and mentoring they might be getting. Try something like, in a humorous way, if you can, calling out, listening for and calling out, the things that people are doing in meetings, perhaps unconsciously talking over people, repeating points you made. Just try one of those things and see how it goes for a while, and encourage others to try something as well.
It's possibly getting shallower as we go along, but I actually think it's important to get upset at the moment when there's a whole lot of people shouting a load of nonsense about inclusion and diversity and equity in workplaces. We can't just be safe and not shout back. So get intolerant, get impatient for things to change, get upset that things aren't moving fast enough, and say what's on your mind. Let's not retreat into our shells just because there's a backlash against wokeness, and stop making progress, because so much progress being made, but so much further to go. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to introduce you to Prue and Tracey, who are going to wrap up today. It's an honour for me. Thank you for having me here today too. They're both amazing global women and friends, and I've watched them through their careers smash lots of glass ceilings themselves and bring lots of other people up. So,
on behalf of Tracey and I, co-chairs of Empower Women, we just, thank you for your time. Inclusive leadership is a critical capability, helping organisations adapt to diverse customers, markets, ideas and talent. And while our first 2 leadership series events focused on the woman into leadership, and secondly on how we actually break down the structural systems, this was intentionally focused on inclusive leadership and the impact male allies can have in supporting these barriers, breakdown of these barriers. We believe gender equity in women in leadership is not for women alone to solve. We believe the real change can happen if we have alignment, commitment across the board and travelling road together.
So while the intention of the panel was to provide some food for thought, we are all about action, and as Matt said, we're up for concrete change. So you've had some great takeaways from the panellists today. So we'd really like to ask you to think about your own organisation and what inclusive leadership looks like within that organisation, who's involved in the discussions and the actions, and what takeaway you're going to take back to your organisation. I think for me, what I've heard, probably selective hearing, is that it's okay to be upset and it's okay to shout. And I don't need to feel bad about raising the issues all the time, because we need many in the room, we need to keep the conversation going. And I really do. I'm so grateful for the panelists. We're very focused on wanting men to lead this conversation because it's just gets so hard. We really do try to have inclusive events and we just don't get men around the table. So men, please spread the word. We're not scary, we're inclusive. We want to make change together and I think we can do that together. And I would also like to encourage everyone to, in a bit of a, I'm going to do the plug, Joe, to consider the Mobilise program that Joe has co-founded with Jess Stewart. It's a program which looks, as has been mentioned, on building strong allies, on strengthening leadership, on amplifying advocacy, bolstering a culture where diversity thrives, equity is prioritised, and inclusion becomes everyone's priority. And I don't know about you, but that just, I feel that, and hopefully you've heard that through the panellists. This is not negotiable. We all have a responsibility to be part of the change, and I would like to think that we can make that change. So we'll be sharing some further information with you when we share the video later this week around the Mobilise program, and I hope you will take that back to organisations. So thank you very much, panellists. Thank you, Katie, for facilitating it so well, for Deloitte's hosting, and for everyone joining us, particularly our men. So thank you. Yeah.